Well, hello and welcome to Safety FM. Right now, we are on the verge of starting off having Rob Fisher take over the radio station. And he will actually be doing the Essential Leadership Cycle, a discussion about that here on Safety FM, discussing the information on how to use the Essential Leadership Cycle during these times. So we'll have him going here in the next few moments, just so you are aware. So Rob Fisher will be taking over the radio station as being discussed right now. And you'll have the opportunity of taking a listen to what Fisher Improvement Technologies has going on as they are putting on this, we'll say this simulcast, because we are simulcasting on our different platforming networks. So that gives you the opportunity of taking a listen on what he has going on. And of course, gives you the opportunity as well to go out and about and view some of these great things that they have going on at Fisher Improvement Technologies. And you'll see some information that he'll cover, and he's going to talk about some things that you can find on his website. If you are listening to the radio station aspect, you'll be able to see those things or hear about those things and find out where to pick them up after you're done taking a listen, or if you want to pull over, if you're driving, of course. And it'll give you the opportunity of taking a listen there. So that's some stuff that we have going on here today. So definitely want to bring you this, because it is definitely an exclusive here on Safety FM. So in the next few minutes, we'll get this started with the Essential Leadership Cycle. I will drop in and drop out as needed, just for information purposes, as you are aware. So Rob Fisher has been teaching this for quite some time. So you'll be able to take a listen here in the next few moments. And it sounds like they're coming in right now as we speak. So we'll take a listen together here. But if you're not familiar with AERO, that is Advanced Error Reduction in Organization. So they're going to be talking about using the Essential Leadership Cycle to manage the current COVID-19 challenges. It's going to be an interesting one for sure, as you'll be able to learn some information on what exactly they have going on. Because I think that this is going to be important to our audience and the different aspects of the different changes that we're seeing in our world. So do take an advantage of taking a listen to this as we start moving forward. Should start any moment now. And normally also, if you are listening to the radio station, I know that right now we would normally be paying the news at the top of the hour. That will not be the case during this segment. But what we'll do is once we get out, we'll drop directly back into the news. So that'll be something available to you. Just so you are aware. In case you run into any questions with that. But like I was saying, Rob Fisher will come up. He is the president and director of operations of Fisher Improvement Technologies. And we should be rolling any moment now. But this is going to be one of those presentations that's going to have a lot of information that will be available to you. So make sure that if you are taking a listen on the stations, that you do get the resources they're going to be providing at the end directly off of their website. You can go to aerohp.com. That is AEROHP.com. Or you can go to ARROWHP.com. Just in case. And we have those. We'll have that information available. So as soon as we have something going on, I'll let you know. But of course, as you have seen some different things going on inside of our world, but wanted to give you the opportunity of taking a listen to this as we move forward with this different world that we're almost living in at this particular moment. But the technology that they do use at Fisher Improvement Technologies is one of the best ones that I've seen in the industry. And I believe that they'll be able to cover some information with you that you might have not expected.
All right. Hello, everyone.
And we'll get you rolling here.
Thank you for joining us on our webinar on using the Essential Leadership Cycle to manage the current COVID-19 challenges. I'm Justin. I'm going to be the technology manager here at FIT. And I'll be working in the background throughout this webinar to help with questions and ensure everything runs smoothly for you. We will be pausing periodically to answer your questions and check in. Thank you for joining us. For questions related to the topic that Rob's speaking on, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And for statements or technical questions, please use the chat box and I'll address those as soon as possible. I do know that some of our listeners are tuning in on Safety FM, and some of them are coming in from their phones. So we have made the slide deck available. That's going to be on the front page of our websites for everyone. Just visit improvewithfit.com, and you can find that link at the top of the page. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Rob Fisher.
Thanks, Justin, and I hope everyone's having a good day. Well, my name's Rob Fisher. I own a company called Fisher Improvement Technologies. We've spent the last 25 years helping organizations and individuals understand how and why people make mistakes, especially mistakes that could prove to be catastrophic, and how you can do one of three things with those mistakes or errors. You can prevent the mistake or error, you can mitigate the consequences of the errors that you can't prevent, or you can reduce the probability that someone makes a mistake. The reason why I thought it was important to have this webinar today is to help understand that in this time of change with different people doing different things, leaders need the opportunity to use a model to lead a little bit differently. So let's get right into it. My goals today are to help you when you go out into your organization or help you in your everyday life, and to actually give you some science basis for why people do what they do. When you have a science basis, it helps you frame things differently than just opinions. And you may have noticed in the current COVID-19 crisis that when everything was opinions, they were all over the place. But when people started believing the science, then things started to change. So I want to talk a little bit today about leading under difficult conditions, and I'm just going to mute my camera and get right to it. So if you want to change someone's paradigm, you need to give them a paradigm that makes more sense to them than the one you're asking them to leave. Again, we're in a new world, and that new world started for some of us a few days ago, for some of us a few weeks ago, but for most of us, no more than a month ago. We have to change the way we look at things. We have to change our paradigm a little bit. But when you're doing that, when you're working with people that have done things for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, or 6 weeks the same way, when you ask them to leave that paradigm, you're going to have to give them something more powerful than the one that you're asking them to leave. It's a very personal thing. So in order to do that, let's fall back on some systems thinking. Now, system thinking came about in about the 1940s when Dr. W. Edwards Deming helped us through the recovery from World War II. And one of the things Dr. Deming said in his theories of quality back in the 1940s, which are now called Deming's principles, is that a bad system will beat a good person every time. In other words, the good person is trying to do the right thing, but a bad system will drive them possibly to do the wrong thing. So in the systems thinking model, think about your leadership and your leadership towards outcomes as a gearbox that's trying to drive a machine. And that machine starts off leader knowledge. The people on this webinar, you're all leaders. It's your knowledge that is going to drive this machine. But that knowledge has to actually push your language and behaviors. So we've had certain knowledge, language, and behaviors up to now. Now we get more knowledge, we change our language and behaviors. That's very observable to the workforce, which is where people get hurt, maimed, and killed, which is where people are getting the outcomes. So we have to understand in the gear model that the tie to get the outcome from the workforce is done through a belt of engagement. It's not directly coupled. And what I mean by that is that belt of engagement can be too tight and the machine becomes inefficient, or it can be too loose and the machine becomes ineffective. So if we want to create the better outcomes, whether those better outcomes are cultural, or values or norms or better outcomes for your key performance indicators, then we have to start with leader knowledge and leader language and behaviors. And that's why we're here today. Because there's three big things we really want to control. Somebody might get hurt, something might get broken, or people may not be satisfied. Now, those people that might not be satisfied could be your customers. They could be people in your organization. It could be you. It could be your shareholders if you're publicly traded. But any stakeholder, if they maintain satisfaction, then the other two are easier. If they're not satisfied, then the other two, people getting hurt and things getting broken, are very difficult. So let's talk about some of the understandings that underpin what leaders need to know. And the first one is that about 90% of bad things that happen are caused by something other than just the individual. In other words, in about 90% of the cases, it's not that the individual wasn't involved. It's like the chicken and the pig at breakfast. The chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. Other than just means that there are systemic drivers in play. People don't necessarily mean for the outcomes to happen, even though they meant to do what they did. That's where Dr. Deming built his principles around. The second one is that about 95% of us react very similarly in a physiological way to the same stimuli. What we mean by that is, as humans, physiologically, the way we're wired, the way we're built, we're very predictable. I'm not talking about our personality tendencies. I'm not talking about the way we look. I'm talking about the way our physiology works. Everyone feels stress pretty much the same way. It may happen at different levels. It may happen at different times, but our breathing's going to increase. Our heart rate's going to increase. We're going to feel frustrated. The reality is stoplights wouldn't work if this wasn't true. So we have to understand human predictability. And there's about 5% of people out there that are wired differently. And I will tell you, most of those don't work for you. So let's talk about the majority, the 95% of people that react very similarly to the same stimuli. Then we bank on Dr. Sidney Decker's work. He would ask the question, do you think your folks come to work to do a decent job every day? They usually don't come to work to get hurt. They don't come to work to break your stuff. But what they do is they do what they do at the time they do it for reasons that make sense to them at the time. Very often we approach things with a hindsight bias, and we think that, well, they should have done something different. It's just common sense that they wouldn't have done it. Folks, it is not common sense. And I want to express that common sense isn't really common. Common sense is your belief that I should believe the way you believe on whatever it is we're talking about. Common sense is when we believe our own paradigm. It's a bias. So if you set common sense off to the side and you try to discover how things happen and what happened as opposed to why someone did something, then you're not trying to use a hindsight bias, common sense argument, and you're trying to discover why people did what they did at the time they did it and why it made sense to them at the time and why Dr. Deming's probability of there was a 90% probability that there was a systemic driver becomes important. So to do that, we think about the task-based system. The task-based system says simply that on any task at any time, any individual, no matter where they're at home, at work, or at play, is surrounded by other people, programs, processes, work environments, organization, equipment. This is a dynamic system. All of these things change all of the time. They all impact each other. They all impact the individual, and the individual impacts all of these things. So the interdependency of this system says that as these elements change, we will tend to react to the changes in people, programs, processes, work environments, organization, equipment, based on very specific personality tendencies. And we have to manage those personality tendencies when we're reacting to changes in that system, because the system, when it changes, the risk may not come from a place that we are in tune to seeing it come from. In other words, people tend to not see work environment and equipment risk. Work environment and process people tend to not see people and organizational risk. So we have to tune ourselves in the task-based system to see risk coming from where the risk comes from instead of where we naturally see it come from. That's especially important in today's environment in our response to the COVID crisis, because the risk is now coming from places that are different from where it may have come for us before, because we're doing new tasks, we're doing it new ways. But the way leaders can respond to all of those different task-based systems out there is by using something we call the essential leadership cycle. The essential leadership cycle is a model leaders can use to manage their systems and their organizational risk and improvement. And I'm just going to step you through that model in a way that helps understand how it can be used by leadership. But first, you want to talk about why you need the essential leadership cycle. Who should be using it? What are leaders supposed to do with it? And how can leaders use the cycle? So if you're watching this live, you understand or you see that the why is in the color blue. The who is in the color yellow. The what is in the color red. And the how is in the color green. Those are the questions, the typical questions that need to be answered by each of the E colors, which we'll describe later, or by the different major personality types. So leaders need the essential leadership cycle because they need to set the example for the workforce. I will tell you this, over hundreds of deployments, as a leader, if you follow processes and models, your folks will follow processes and models. If you actively use the tools to ensure that you maintain your lowest error rate, they will use the tools. These are modeled behaviors. But I also want you to understand that works in families as well. So if you're the leader of the family, the old saying from my past, do as I say and not as I do, didn't work then, and it doesn't work now. When you model those behaviors, remember, leader knowledge comes first, then leader language and behaviors. When you use that language and behaviors, your people will do it. And this should apply whether you're a senior leader or a manager who wants to ensure that your workforce maintains production in a safe manner, or frontline supervisors who want to ensure that your group's interpretation of your bigger organization's values actually match. And we'll talk about that in the shared vision and values section. And what you can do as a leader is to lead with what we call intentionality. In other words, intentionally focus on the parts of the essential leadership cycle that you need to focus on to get the outcomes that you want. Pay attention to where things are happening on the cycle. And when you fix problems, use the task-based system and the essential leadership cycle to ensure that you're fixing problems where those problems are originating instead of just where you think they may be originating. Then you can also engage with the workforce on each of those elements. And in order to do that, don't try to do it from memory. Carry a copy of the essential leadership cycle. We've got a PDF that's available after the webinar, and you'll be able to make some copies and refer to that instead of trying to remember it. Remember, the modeled behavior to get your people to use processes and procedures is for them to see you doing it. Bucket the successes and failures in the elements of the task-based system, the essential leadership cycle. When successes happen or failures happen, take a look at the cycle and use those as your buckets. And then be intentional when engaging with the workforce or your family throughout that leadership cycle. So just to give you a pre-brief, I'm going to stop here for about 15 seconds and see if there's any questions that have come up, and I'll answer those about the basis for the essential leadership cycle, and then I'll move on.
Thank you, Rob. We don't have any questions at this time, so feel free to continue.
Okay, great. So moving into this next section, there's a lot of writing on the page, but I'm going to just tell you briefly what we mean. I want to go through each element of the essential leadership cycle. The first one is self and team awareness. Self and team awareness is about me being aware of how I am as an individual, how I manage, how I lead, what my personality tendencies are. Do I understand what traps are? Do I understand what triggers I have? Do myself and my team know what the definition of an error, a deviation, and a violation are? And do we manage those? Do we understand the mental models that people use to do work and how those need to be managed? So self and team awareness on the self-awareness side is about understanding and managing our personality tendencies. Again, I'll have a slide in a little while where you can go take the e-colors if you haven't done that already. But by understanding and managing our personality tendencies, we can then respond to changes in the leadership cycle and in the task-based system instead of reacting to it. Understanding that tasks and steps hurt, maim, and kill people, not jobs and occupations. Understanding the error rates associated with different mental models and how we can help ourselves and different people shift between those error rates, especially in the current situation where a lot of new people are going to be doing new tasks. So we have to maintain that understanding of what their probabilities are so we can help them manage risk. And then that also talks about our ability to use our understanding of mental models and performance modes to help our particular personality manage floating in and out of those. In team awareness, we have to think about the listening styles and communication styles of our team. We can watch for team triggers to help us understand others' tendencies. Do they display their e-colors or display their personality tendencies? Do they use tools like pocket guides? And when you manage teams, it starts with self and team awareness. In other words, do we know our team makeup well enough to make sure we get the most effective and efficient outcomes from that team? And do we understand how our unmanaged tendencies may disrupt teamwork? This is just one example. In the medical industry, our partners at Equilibrium have developed an intentional communications card. And what it does is it helps people understand what they may be dealing with related to how people need information and how we like to give information. And you may notice that this is particularly slanted towards the difference in maybe why someone can't go in and visit a loved one while they're quarantined. Or maybe we can use this to explain to our children or our relatives why we need to self-impose social distancing. But intentional communication says, I understand and I manage those tendencies. In the essential leadership cycle, good self and team awareness leads to a good shared vision and values. If your organization or your family has a clearly defined and put out compass, your mission, vision, values, and goals, that's one thing. It has to be clearly defined. But we have to make sure that the individuals actually share that vision and value. We want to make sure that people remain aligned with those larger organizational values. If you've attended a church, you may have two people living right next door to each other that both go to the same church, but their interpretation of the church values in their family unit is a little different. But in the workplace, we have to make sure that all of our team members have a common understanding of what those values are and that we stay true to those values. And we do that through engagement. You remember the engagement belt on the gear model. When we engage with the workforce, the majority of a leader's engagements should be related to the vision and values and mission and goals, not just are you doing the work that you're assigned to do. And if they understand the mission, vision, and values, then we can make sure that we communicate and create clear roles and processes that meet those mission, vision, and values. And If you've got good self and team awareness and you've got good shared vision and values that you verify through engagement, then you can start to create clear, concise, usably, and technically accurate processes. We use something called roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and authorities. And leaders have to create those with intentionality. A leader has to understand the difference between work as imagined and work as done. We created the work as imagined versus work as done scenario about 5 years ago to help understand that it's not just about drift at the job level. It can be about isolated drift at the task and step level. The way we think work is done is not the way it's actually done. And people's ability to stop and seek out help, and whether we enable them to do that when they are outside of a procedure, program, process, parameter, or situation as you expected it to be, or what we call oops. That's when you define unsure for the individual. You move from empowering people to stop and seek out help to enabling people to stop out help. And this essential leadership cycle can be viewed as a process. Remember, when you follow a process in a model, your folks will follow processes and models. So knowing the elements that create clarity of roles and processes helps you avoid the traps of those clear roles and processes. So when you use the
would this be a good time to stop and answer a few questions?
Sure.
Great, thank you. The first one is coming in, and it was referring to bucking successes and failures. Could you revisit that and make it a little bit clearer?
Sure. When we have successes and failures, we should be able to trace that success or failure back to a specific element. And I will circle back to this. But if we understand that for a success, maybe the process actually saved us. So we tie back to that process, or some of the people were the final barrier, or someone managed their personality tendencies. In the task-based system, we can bucket our success in how that success was framed, or we can bucket our failures in the same way, maybe a near miss. That same process can then say, okay, do we have that critical attribute, failure or success, in a bigger picture, in clarity of roles and processes? So I realize I'm not getting the entire answer to that question out. I'm going to give you a little tool here in a little while to maybe help you bucket it even better. But I hope that's a start to what that was meaning. Do you have another one, Justin?
Yes, I have two more at this time. The second question is, with people working remotely, what are some of the things you think can help someone feel like they trust their team, even when they can't see them in person?
That's a great question, because trust is going to be the next element that we come to. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to do is I'll just advance this to the trust. First of all, leaders have to understand remote, local, face-to-face, or global. Trust is something that is generated, not demanded. One of the things that we have to do to try to avoid two of the four major personality tendencies, believe that if I tell you to trust me, you should trust me. But two of the four major personality tendencies or types believe that if somebody asks me to trust them, they're trying to hide something. Now, I know out there in the webinar viewership, some of you are laughing or smiling or rolling your eyes at this right now. But this is very important when we work virtually, that we tie things back. It's harder to be self and team aware, so you have to intentionally engage. It's hard to retain the shared vision and values, so we have to engage in a different way. We know that with this COVID crisis, our original roles and processes were not designed for us to be virtual. So when we start talking about those three elements, without just telling people to trust us, but to prove that trust by using these system-based models, and how we respond to failure will really matter. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it happened. or how we respond to success. So I hope that's answering your question. The way the model creates or generates trust, and if you follow the process of the model instead of just trying to jump to trust, then you should be able to generate trust organically instead of demanding trust. So I hope that answered the question. Did you have another one, Justin?
Yes, I have one more. Rob, employees may be stressed due to confusing messages and communication. Where does prompt and accurate communications fit within this essential model, and how can we make sure we communicate enough?
Excellent question. So you may notice that communications isn't a specific attribute of the essential leadership module, essential leadership cycle. The reason for that is each element has its own communication, or what we would call engagement strategy. On a 1-hour webinar, it's difficult to get into all of those. But the self and team awareness piece is where you actually design how you should communicate. Now, I shared with you the medical version of the card, but we also have an intentional communications card that we can provide to you. And that intentional communications card says, I'm going to intentionally communicate in a way that the people that I am self and team aware of need those communications. I don't have that loaded in the presentation, but if you'll email Justin, we can get that to you, or we can provide it in a PDF.
Thank you, Rob.
So again, when you try to develop trust, so this leads right into the answer to the previous question. Developing trust is about how the different personalities perceive trust, develop trust, and lose trust. We can't be, as leaders, overconfident in the trust of our organization, especially in a situation like we're in right now, where everything has changed. Everything is up in the air. You've noticed different leaders from different countries, regardless of how their country trusted them before, they're being viewed completely differently in their either reaction to or response to this current crisis. And the same thing is going to happen to us for leaders. So again, to gain and maintain trust, you want to use very specific models to analyze things. Deviation potential, the probability that a deviation is built into our rules and processes, or deviation drift, or deviation analysis. Because people may be unintentionally deviating or making errors even when they're trying to work through your vision and values. So we need to consciously communicate to be self and team aware of that. If we have good trust, because it's been generated through self and team awareness, shared vision and values, and clear rules and processes, then we can ask for diverse and inclusive input. Now, diversity and inclusion is a big deal. Some people just think it's a buzzword, but let me give you my take on this. Diversity is a condition. It's a fact. Diversity is something you can usually physically see or you know is there. We are diverse in the way we look. We're diverse in the way we act. We're diverse in the way in our gender. We're physically diverse. But we're also diverse in our personality tendencies and the way we think. And in the essential leadership cycle, don't forget to include. Now remember, diversity is a fact. It's a condition. But inclusion is an action. Inclusion is a decision. It's something that you have to do. So even though we couple these terms together quite often, understand they're two different things. One follows the other. And we have to make sure that we include based on diversity of thought. Back to the question from before, how do you make sure people continue to trust you? You make sure that you have diverse and inclusive thought. So when people are working remotely, you have to really go with intentionality to be self and team aware about using their diversity of thought and how those different people with different personalities will give you that diversity of thought. The next thing that the cycle drives is commitment. And as a leader, we have to understand that commitment is a very personal thing. Commitment is not an organizational element. It is person by person by person. And so we have to be present, available, on time, and accessible to all of the levels of the organization. We probably have a paradigm that we use to do that. Some of you may have what I call an open door policy. The challenge is you don't have a door anymore. You're not at work anymore. So how do we frame that? How do we make our team aware of what the new paradigm for us being present, available, and accessible are? And another part of commitment is that we actively understand people's desired information filters. So those behaviors support that system. And then we understand that the lowest standard that we allow is the highest that we can expect from our people. And our different personality types tend to show and perceive commitment differently, whether that's organizational or individual, or whether we look for latent conditions in the system, how we understand risk and mitigation. Just because someone did something that you believe is risky doesn't mean they saw it as risky in the moment. So when we identify and correct problems, we have to use those models. We have to commit to using the models of identification and correcting problems that will get to the right answer or the right causation. The next element that we can put in the model is accountability. Now, one of the challenges with this accountability is that too many organizations think that accountability belongs up here at the front of the model. Accountability should be organically developed. I will tell you from our over 250 deployments, every high-performing organization or highly reliable organization we've ever worked with, you never hear them talk about accountability. It's not that it's not there. It's that in highly reliable and high-performing organizations, accountability is organically developed. Accountability is something that is created by having good self and team awareness that creates shared vision and values. I'm accountable to you. You're accountable to me. We're accountable to the system. The organization is accountable to us. And we all understand the link between our roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and authorities. And we as leaders understand the difference between accountability, taking accounting for what's going on, and discipline, punishing somebody for what they did. And that all comes from our knowledge of the just culture models. And just culture has been around for a few years, but the essential leadership cycle is a way to create a just culture instead of demanding a just culture. Using the models for understanding and determining those elements generates organizational trust, but it also generates learning and continuous improvement, the last element in the essential leadership cycle. So we have to make sure that we've got a valid way to capture and share our lessons learned. We have to make sure that we brief things and we debrief things, and that we understand and apply causes and lessons learned to the things that we debrief. And that we understand that there's not much difference between continuous improvement and what some people call a violation. Just one of them is above the line of performance and one of them is below the line of performance. So by understanding we can learn from all of those things, we have to continually get our members to share those lessons learned. Back again to continue the answer of another question. This becomes a very important block in virtual work, because our team members are now discovering things that we never knew before. Flaws in our system. In our organization, we discovered that one of our important programs wasn't as accessible remotely as we thought it was. So we want to learn those lessons. We want to get people to actively share what they're learning and to create a process for that sharing to happen through our learning and continuous improvement process right now. So this is a great opportunity to flush out some of those challenges, especially at the time when everybody's in a bit of a state of flux right now, that we're learning those lessons before the failure. We're learning them when we're testing them out. We're learning them before it becomes a near miss or a hit. And we manage that change and we modify the system so that those lessons are learned sustainably. Then we can communicate those lessons. And if you understand that, what you've just done is increased your self and team awareness and started the essential leadership cycle over. So I'm going to pause again and just ask Justin if there's any questions, and then I'll move on.
Yes, thank you, Rob. So here's the first one. I work for a utility company performing critical services. Office-based employees are working remotely. Field-based employees are working in the field, warehouses, garages, etc. What workforce safety messaging can leaders share with our field-based employees who may be resentful, who have to work with increased absenteeism, short staffing, different shifts, so that we can reduce incidents?
Yeah, that is one of the toughest questions, and really the reason why I wanted to start our learning modules with the essential leadership cycle. It becomes imperative that the folks in the field are taught and engage with this task-based system. Now, the leaders have to be self and team aware of what's going on out there, and they've got to communicate that shared vision and values. As many of you probably know, I'm an ex-utility worker, so I really get this, because there were times when I was called in or stayed when everybody else went home, whether it was hurricane coverage or storm coverage. In the utility business, people are a little bit used to that. But what we have to do is make sure that they understand we're giving them systems and models, and we have to continually reinforce those systems and models, because they're going to be out there doing things that are the result of their outcomes. So I think I've got a couple of slides in a minute that may go into that a little bit deeper. Let me talk a little bit about the difference between the driving elements and the resultant conditions, because it ties a little bit to this question. Anytime you have questions like that, try to drive back the core to a driving element. Poor trust is a resultant condition of something going wrong in self and team awareness, shared vision, values, and clear roles and processes. Poor accountability is the result of something going wrong in self and team awareness, shared vision, and values. So if the field workforce isn't having a good commitment, or isn't learning things, or isn't trusting, drive back to self and team awareness, shared vision and values, and clear roles and processes. This almost goes back to the bucketing question before, because those are the driving elements. And it's important that people understand that those are the three things that leaders need to focus on to help the field have the least risk they can have in the condition we're in. It's almost inevitable, especially with some of the personality tendency attributes that are out there, that there are people that are going to be thinking, well, I social distance because I work on a breaker, but I've still got to be out here working while everybody else is home with their kids. We need to understand, and I strongly encourage you to download the eColors app onto your mobile device if you haven't already done it. Look at your personality tendencies. Have your team do it. Look at their personality tendencies. That may sound a lot like self and team awareness, so that you can engage and not just observe. Now, if you're confined to your home, as they are in Spain and Italy and France and several other companies, you may not be able to go out and engage. But if you can go out and engage, you can still maintain a social distance and have a conversation. If you can't, then understand that you should set up a protocol and some clear roles and processes about how they should contact you, including the who, the what, the how, and the why of the conversations that you want to have with those people in the field every day, because you can't be there. And folks, my take is that this is probably going to establish a new paradigm where the field will become a little more trusting of giving diverse and inclusive input, because now they would expect, well, my leader doesn't come out to visit me. Now they understand the leader can't come out and visit them. How do we open that line of communications to make sure that people can watch for those triggers and let that leader know if a trap exists so that you can help that workforce manage it, even if it's remote. So that makes it more important that leaders learn the traps that people can fall into and understand how the different personalities see, feel, and manage traps a little bit differently. Because all of this starts with leader knowledge, language, and behaviors. So again, a follow-on to continue trying to answer that question is we have to understand what our folks need, self and team awareness, while they're out there. It may be worth having an elephant in the room conversation. We use a product that you're on now called Zoom to have those meetings. It may be worth putting your team together virtually, even though they're field people, so that in the morning they can see your face. They know you're there and available. It may be worth you giving them a little extra, like the app called Ready, Illumitask Ready. It may be worth you giving them that so that they can, at the end of the pre-task briefing using Ready, they can email you a PDF of their discussion of the pre-task brief, and then you can pop onto FaceTime or onto Zoom or onto one of the virtual components to have those conversations. And if we establish these three elements of self and team awareness, shared vision and values, and clear roles and processes, then you can interface with that workforce a little bit better. I hope that's answering your question a little bit. That is going to be one of the toughest parts of managing this. And you notice I'm trying not to specifically limit this to COVID-19 because it happens to be the systemic driver, but it's probably a way that we're going to be doing business during times of crisis in the future. So I'll pause there again to see if there's any questions.
Yes, I have two more for you at this time, Rob. As of now, many leaders were forced to work remotely because of COVID-19. How can we convince them that productivity may not correlate with on-site physical presence? How can we convince them that working remotely can be an option even in the good days, especially for baby boomers and Gen X leaders?
Yeah, good question. Again, I'm going to go back to the driving elements. You know, part of our vision, values, missions, and goals in the past has been tied to being there. Part of our roles and processes have been tied to you being there. I want to go back to one of my first slides that says that if you want to change someone's paradigm, you have to give them a paradigm that's more important. For people that their self and team awareness is that people are only productive if you can see them, we have to use that to shift their paradigm. That's a self and team awareness element. We as leaders have to be first convinced that we can create the vision, values, mission, goals with people that are remote. And those folks, we may not be seeing them work, but they may be more, to use the term, productive. And I think it's going to take, this is a personal opinion, no science behind it, I think it's going to take a redefinition of productive. Again, a shift in a paradigm. So when you let those boomers, of which I'm a part of, when they discover how productive they can be when they're not being micromanaged, which, by the way, boomers hate, then they will understand that the products that the people that are working remotely are producing are valuable. And I think that paradigm will shift. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rob. And then I have one more for you. How long does it take to implement the process of the essential leadership cycle?
Well, it was funny. I was on a call last night with Australia, and our answer usually shocks people, but it's true. The essential leadership cycle takes as long to implement as it takes you as a leader to change your knowledge and change your language and behaviors is start using it. The interesting thing about the essential leadership cycle is that you don't have to be good at it in the beginning because your organization doesn't know you're using it. So every person that you talk to and engage with, you can explain how you're looking at things differently. When we do, as an organization, an essential leadership cycle module for an organization, then we usually do it with the senior leaders. And I was in Atlanta 2 weeks ago, and I was getting calls and emails about how they were using the essential leadership cycle in their leadership team meetings the day after. I was on that call with Australia last night. Two of the people piped in from one of the facilities that had actually deployed the advanced error reduction, of which the essential leadership cycle is part of. They blended right in and said, look, when our leaders started using this model and behaving this way, things shifted almost immediately. And that was their experience, not our statement of what could happen. And that's what we've seen in multiple organizations. The mistake I think a lot of organizations make is they think that to use something like the essential leadership cycle and task-based system as models, you have to change a culture to do it. Here's a way I would like you to think differently. Think of culture as an outcome instead of an input. My leader language and behaviors will drive language and behavior changes in the workforce, and culture will then change. And it changes very quickly, far quickly than most organizations who try to attack culture change them. So if you believe that culture changes one behavior at a time, and the behaviors that matter the most are the leader behaviors, then you can start those shifts almost immediately. And we've seen fabulous change very quickly. And one organization that I was on the phone with yesterday has been using the essential leadership cycle and bucketing in the essential leadership cycle. I didn't even know they'd been doing it. So we can then go on and do maybe a little refresher or some help with the modeling after. But the short answer is things start to change very quickly when you pay attention to the driving elements. So there's 4 things I'd like to for you to keep in mind. The first one is know your why. When times get tough, that's going to be all that matters. Go back and revisit it, and continually revisit it. We're doing a lot of work remote, so take some time to reflect on why you're doing what you're doing. But it is important to learn what to do and then to do that. We know what works and we know what doesn't, and we know what to do about it. And those hows matter. One of the challenges in many organizations is they just tell people what to do and let them figure out the hows, and they don't start with the why. So as a leader, you may have to be a little bit ahead of the curve in learning how to do it. But there's a lot of folks out there that know how to make this happen, how to make the essential leadership cycle work for you. You have to know who to go to for advice and who to go to for help, whether it's in your organization or your leadership or your peers or your accountability and thinking partner or even us. Know who you can go to and then go to those people, because remember, everybody's doing things virtually now. So I hope that this gave you a bit of a framework. I've put a QR code on the slide that you can just use your phone and zap that. That'll take you directly to our Insights page where all of these things are posted. And I'm going to now open up for a few more questions and answers. And I'm going to just turn my video on to do that. So I hope you enjoyed, and this was an effective communication tool for you with all of us working virtually. So Justin, I'm going to let you tell us if there's any more questions that we need to answer.
Yes, thank you very much. Before you answer the questions, I just wanted to let everyone know that this was streaming live to our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to go back and rewatch, you can go to the Fisher Improvement Technologies YouTube channel. And please visit our Insights page for more valuable information there as well. Next question is, I see the who, the what, and the how in the driving elements. I have recently become more aware of the power of the why, and the why drives behaviors. Can you help me communicate the why better in the leadership cycle?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So very much like communications, the why is a bit embedded in each of them. So from a self and team awareness perspective, we have to use different whys. My wife has different whys than I do. So if I want to be effective at changing paradigms, I have to understand her whys. So at each of the self and team awareness, shared vision and value, and clear roles and processes, we have to go back to our team and try to understand their why elements. That's a perfect example of how the whys infiltrate everything. And different e-colors manage them differently, but the top e-color blue, it just happens to be their first question. Any more, Justin?
No, not at the moment. Let's just give it a few more minutes in case someone may be thinking of a question to add.
And you're still.
As people are thinking about their questions, I'll give this about one more minute. I just want to tell you, you're not in this alone. There's plenty of resources to help you. It's new for all of us. We happen to be very blessed at Fisher Improvement Technologies because the last word in our name is technologies. And we've been working diligently over the last 5 years to have technological solutions to things that people used to do in person, to help make you more productive, help make you understand risk better, make you manage and lead serious injuries and fatalities in a better manner. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you watching this, and please feel free to share it with your teams. It may be a good remote or virtual sharing that you can then have a team conversation about how do we start to implement and integrate the essential leadership cycle as a team when we're trying to manage remotely. So from me to you, thank you very much. And I'll ask if there's any further questions, and if not, we'll end the webinar.
Looks like we're good to go. Thank you all very much. If you do happen to think of any questions after the webinar ends, you can send those to info@improvewithfit.com, and we'll be happy to answer them that way. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Okay, so you have been listening to Rob Fisher coming to you live on Safety FM. So just want to make sure that you are aware of this. This is also, like I had told you at the very beginning, that we were going to be doing this, where you could actually do where you could listen to the streamer on Safety FM. I'm going to flip over to our main camera here. Oh, maybe not that. Maybe that's not what we're looking for. Anyways, flipping over to the main camera. So that was pretty interesting perspective there from Rob, giving us the information. So like he did say, you can actually go to improvewithfit.com/insights to get some more information on what's going on. You could also go to Aero, that's AEROHP.com, and that will get you some additional information as well in regards of what he had information-wise. So we're going to have this on our different networks, platforms, and so on, but we will also have it streaming in a podcast. We'll see if it ends up becoming part of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, which I believe it will. But this was an hour with Rob Fisher taking over Safety FM. Hopefully you did enjoy the time here where he did discuss the Essential Leadership Cycle and how you can actually apply it into this different times, especially with dealing with COVID-19. Anyways, thank you for always being the best part of Safety FM. And that is the listener. We will get you back to the regularly scheduled program right here at the very end. And then hopefully you'll be able to have the opportunity to take a listen to the news at the very top of the hour. Thank you for everything you do. Currently 1:57 in the afternoon, Wednesday, March the 18th. Speak to you soon. Thank you for listening.